about this I'm now struggling to put it in order. I may not be coming across as very precise about this, but let me try to make sense of what I'm saying. How he would stake out a scene would obviously depend on the scene. I mean, but you can be sure of one thing: when he comes into an area, he's going to come in like any guy returning to the scene of any crime. Obviously, very, very careful. This guy's very wary. He's going to be looking for anything out of shape. So, I mean, I would, if I were undertaking surveillance of this kind of scene, you found the body, you've done everything possible to make sure no word about it got out. That would be an undertaking in and of itself. And I realize that this runs contrary to the basic nature of every detective out there. I mean, the first thing we'll do is just rush in there and cordon off the area and do hands and knee searches and pick up threads and everything else. I think there comes a time in an investigation like this one where you got to take some chances. And this would be one of them. And I would, like I think I told, I'd send a team in to surreptitiously look at the scene, photograph it, making sure that they weren't seen from a roadway or anything, and then come in and under cover of darkness and remove the body as carefully as possible, if it wasn't seen from the roadway, you know. So you would preserve any evidence there, and then just simply, because if like a lot of these victims were off the road, I don't know how far they were carried off the road, and if they couldn't be seen by the road, if somebody would stop their car either right at the scene or maybe half a mile away and walk in, by the time he reaches that point where the body should be and it's not there, and he says, uh-oh, you know, he should already be onto him, all right? Even if he, I mean, anybody walking in the area has obviously got to be approached by somebody in the surveillance team saying, what are you doing here? You know, we're looking for an escaped convict, you know, show us some ID, something like that. But believe me, I tried to be as emphatic as I could with this guy and guys in similar crimes and going back to the scenes. I mean,
well, this man obviously has a hell of a lot of scenes. Would you then perceive that more most recent find? Of course, we don't always know that the most recent find is in fact chronologically correct with his activities, because you know, find number 35 actually may have occurred back between homicide 13 and 15, but we just don't know because.
Yeah, I think, in my opinion, the fresher the find, the more likely he'll be back. I mean, I don't think he's going back to see skeletal remains, although I'm not, you know, you can't be, I wouldn't say for certain, no, you wouldn't be. But you asked how long it would be. And I think, again, I'd have to look at the list of dates to get an idea of the pattern in which he was just depositing the bodies at these various sites. But I wouldn't be discouraged if I were to sit on a site for, you know, several weeks and nothing happened. A week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Just because he doesn't show up doesn't mean he won't. I mean, obviously there are going to be limits. And surveillance, see, some of the bodies are found up in the mountains along Highway 410 up by Auburn. Enumclaw, which is up by the mountains. It's a small town just before you go up into the mountains. And it's interesting that you go up there. But I don't know. Some of the bodies are fairly close to the roadway, but I'm not sure they were seen. They could be seen from the roadway, the skeletal remains. But in a remote location like that, surveillance becomes a real challenge because there aren't that many people to blend in with or human type or structures to be hid by. Nevertheless, I think it can be done. Because I think that there are times probably when the compulsion to return, I mean, to the scene of the crime, and I know that sounds like a cliche. We're not talking about the scene of the crime anyway, we're talking about a body. We don't know where the crime occurred. It may have occurred in his car. In all likelihood, it didn't occur where the bodies were dumped. Okay. But he's returning to see the bodies, and I imagine whatever drives him to do that is whether it's curiosity or a desire to make sure he didn't leave any evidence there, or just some kind of thrill, is probably strong enough to cause him to, while he's cautious, he's not going to be obsessively so. I mean, he's going to probably overlook, you know, a hunter, a car parked along the side of the road, or a couple people on dirt bikes, maybe, you know, but he's going to be alert as he can be, considering what he wants to do.
Would you have any feelings at all on how long he would stay?
I don't. I don't. I really don't. It would really depend on what he was up to. It could. I mean, really. All I have to say, given my sense of this situation, is that he would go back, whether it be for 5 minutes or an hour. It doesn't appear that he's going back and, for instance, dismembering the victims. They all appear to be in one piece, or at least they were, until the animals got to them. Are you following me?
Sure, sure. Is there a likelihood that he would take, I'm sure I ask you this, but with so many victims, and perhaps the earlier victims when he began, he could perceive how many more there were going to be, maybe didn't know how long this need was going to be, or this drive until it was finally fulfilled, satisfied, or whatever. Is it likely in the earlier victims they would have been treated differently than in the later victims? In other words, the earlier ones were maybe more personal to him, and the later ones were more just numerical. In other words,
Or maybe the first one, you know, you talk about building yourself up till you're ready. Well, let's just say for the first one.
Oh, that certainly. I can imagine the first victim, the first time he actually acted out successfully. Remember, there may be some victims that persons that he approached and either tried to pick up or picked up and they got away or something until he got whatever down, whatever MO he was developing, he got down pat. Remember, this guy just didn't start from, you know, from a running start. He started somewhere. His first murder victim was not the first woman found in that river. Or at least, if she wasn't the first one he tried. And then, I mean, I feel really strongly about that. There's no question. He didn't just start. His first murder victim was not thrown in that river, in my opinion, and he'd probably been building up to it for some time. And if you look at the number of unsolved homicides of young women in the Pacific Northwest, prior to that time, they're all messed up. So you take your pick, you know, which one might or might not be a precursor to the series that they call the Green River series officially. It didn't begin with the river, and it didn't end, in all likelihood, in December of '83, and there are probably a lot in between nobody knows about. It's known that they're on nobody's list. But he certainly, the first one, if, for instance, that the young woman found, the first victim, I believe, found in the river, let's assume for a moment she's the first one, was a young woman who lived in the Tacoma area, interestingly, which is south of Seattle. Actually, she wasn't from Tacoma. I think she was from the Puyallup, Tacoma area. She lived out of town, believed to be a prostitute. I think she was 16. She was believed to be involved in prostitution, which says perhaps she had traveled up to the Pacific Highway South area, which would be about, you know, a 30-40 mile drive, or a hitchhike, or whatever. I believe she didn't have a car. I don't know for sure. But there's also the possibility that she was, and I think you'd have to ask people up there. I think it'd be important to know where did this young woman hang out. She was the first of the official string of victims, and it always struck me as being rather significant that she was from Pierce County, because my pet theory, and it's only that, is that the guy, whoever he is, lived south of King County, either in South King County or Pierce County or Thurston County. But
what criteria do you have for coming to that?
The way just the way the bodies start showing up, and it's just a sense. I can explain it, but it may not make sense to you. It may not satisfy you. The map. Just look at the map. I looked at the map of where the bodies were found and when they disappeared, and I kept saying, you know, they're drifting south and southwest, but they're all staying in King County. I mean, it's like at least they were for a long time until they found the ones in Portland. But initially, and those went way south, talking about going south. But nobody went north. I mean, all the bodies drifted south, either a block or a mile or 2 miles, or they went southwest, up into the mountains, would be southwest of there. And yet, it seemed like for a time he was being careful to leave them in King County. But you notice those that were later found in Portland, you know, went, as I say, way south. But none, at least none on the list, have been found in Pierce County, which is the county just south of King County, Tacoma. None that nobody will admit to. There are a couple, I understand, who fit the profile, but the authorities in Pierce County, it's my understanding, don't want them on the list.
I realize you've got other things to do today.
Yeah.
What would your thumbnail sketch profile be of this guy? Have you already been asked that?
No, I haven't thought of it. So I had it's been so long since I thought of it, and I have thought about it.
I mean, basically, we're talking about a man who has some social skills, who's comfortable amongst other people, who's obviously fairly intelligent, who's been able to systematically target, and maybe victims of opportunity, but he's out looking. He's got this urge within him, and he's able to approach them, remove them, do whatever. We're not sure what that is because of the conditions of the bodies, but obviously totally possess them, be there when their last breath is spit out, dump them, and all this without being identified.
Yeah, well, he's he's given us a great deal of thought, both before, during, and after that period of time of July 82 to December of 83. I mean, I wouldn't go so far as to say how old I thought he was or whatever, but he obviously has a great deal of time on his hands, because as intense as this guy was during that period, okay, I don't know who knows what he's doing now, but during that period he had to have a lot of time on his hands, because believe me, the frequency with which he was seeking and finding victims, it meant he was spending a lot more time looking for them, and now we know he was driving back and forth to Portland too. And as I vaguely recall, I plotted this out. The victims disappeared on every day of the week, virtually, I think. I think there was a slight preference for one couple days, but I can't remember, that they disappeared daytime and nighttime. So the guy had a lot of time on his hands. So was he unemployed? Part-time employment? Because of the condition of the bodies, it's hard to say. What if he took them home? And if he has a lot of time on his hands, I mean, does he live alone? Is another good question. Does he have a family? But somebody who's taking that much time is probably fairly unattached. Not necessarily without a girlfriend or anything, but I doubt that he had a family as much time in traveling as he was doing. I imagine that it would be very difficult for someone tied down with any day-to-day responsibilities during that period to handle all that activity. But I don't know if he likes country western music, or if his mother was a prostitute, or if he's 25 years older, or any of the more precise stuff that would be helpful if you know it. I mean, all I'm dealing with, though, remember, the only thing that I've seen are newspaper clippings that will send me, and the maps that show where the bodies were found, and a few lists that show when and where they disappeared from, and where they were found. I mean, just really, really sketchy stuff. But probably it's an advantage, because I think sometimes, I know in my own life, when I have lots and lots of stuff that I have to digest, I tend to be more overwhelmed with it. And I can imagine that the guys who are in the investigation, the task force, look at the voluminous amount of information they have, and the files, and the computer printouts, and they go, God, who can make sense of this? It must be overwhelming. But probably that's why someone in your position, who doesn't have to deal with the day-to-day stuff that can befuddle even a good investigator, can give them insights and say, hey, have you thought of this? How about putting this and this together?
Right. We try to have that as our role. Of course, we want to make sure we're as best as possible leading them in the right direction. Because as you mentioned earlier, you lead them astray and you certainly hurt them more than you help them.
20 more, how about 20 more minutes?
We don't want you to miss lunch.
No, I've got,
miss anything.
I've got no problem there. No, I was just saying, I need to get back and get my files together to see my experience this afternoon.
Sure. We're down here for the week, but understanding that you've got several appointments tomorrow, is that right?
Oh, all day tomorrow.
Yeah, so, and if your attorney's coming in today or anyone else, we certainly don't want to take time away from other important people when you're...
No, I can't, I don't, yeah, right. I've got more than enough to, unfortunately, to think about and
Can I just background that one? Just to update us on where you're at, or what is it?
well, and what are you interested in?
Well, are you married presently?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is this public information or something you don't want us to know, or I don't know?
Yes, it's public information, surely.
Well, I do.
We sat here with a tape recorder, just like you have, and I was saying,
Speaking of-
and they were saying, well, let's talk about, some of these crimes they suspected you of. And I said, well, I can't really talk about them. Well, how do you want to do it? And they said, well, let's figure out some way we can talk about it. And we sat here and negotiated on how we're going to do this. And it wasn't any deception involved at all. It was very deliberate. And they said, well, how about if we do it this way? That I said, well, I'm going to continue to maintain my innocence, but we can do it like based upon what I've read, I would speculate that this would be what might have happened. Okay.
Third person type of thing, is it?
Yeah, and it wasn't, I'm going to talk in the third person. It was, I'm going to speculate about what I've read and do the same thing the police would do, if they were trying to figure out what happened.
Reconstruct crimes, basic investigative strategy, right?
Right. And so that's basically what happened. They would say, okay, what do you think happened at Lake Sammamish? And I said, well, first of all, I don't know what happened. And then we go into this law, and they said, well, we don't like that because we read something and that doesn't really fit with what the police know. I said, well, how if we do it? Okay, we'll do it this way. Okay. And I swear, if you actually sat down and listened to their tapes, you would hear a lot of this nonsense. Okay, and what I've got to tell you, I want you to be clear. That was not a nice thing to do. First of all, money makes people do things which are sometimes not right, and I think part of the problem with that was the money. And you put your finger on it. Making money, especially off of this kind of thing, is really wrong. And I could never do it again because it just, when you get in this kind of thing for profit, it's just too many bad things happen. And it should, because you shouldn't be doing it. And it was wrong for us to sit here and coldly do what we did, because there are a lot of people out there who read this kind of stuff. And it just didn't work, and it felt bad all the way along. And I look back on it as a learning experience. But I would just rather not say anything anymore than engage in that kind of cruel kind of speculation. And it was just a game, and it was wrong for us both, all of us, to do it.
Became a bestseller.
Huh?
Became a bestseller. You're gonna make a hell of a
Well, we did correctly, I guess, anticipate the baser desires of people who oftentimes buy these books, who want to be titillated or who want to have their prurient interests indulged. There are people who read these books for genuine reasons too, and unfortunately, I think more often than not they're misled if that's what they're looking for. Because whoever has read any of these books does not know anything about me or what really happened. And I don't say that with any sense of being smug or anything. That's just the way it is.
Well, you're an individual. How many people really know other people as well as you know yourself?
Sure.
There have been other people who have written books who contend that they've known you prior to any alleged criminal involvement, and that they feel that they know Ted Bundy. What are your thoughts on that?
But
They really have
For that, to the extent that...
I think you know what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
yeah. Well, they had an opportunity to, and they certainly had genuine access. For example, there's access to...
Is that too hot? You might want to-
No, it's always cold.
Okay.
No, you don't have to worry about that. No, the access to me was really very superficial. She's in her own way, under certain conditions, a very nice person. I have no animosity toward her, but there's no question that she grossly overplayed what was a passing acquaintance. And all we did was have our shifts at a colon
Do you
crisis.
remember her?
Oh, I remember.
Okay.
No, I remember her very clearly. But she had absolutely no basis to write a book the way I understand she did, or claim that, that in her own way she knew me. It would be like if you were to have a co-worker and you would work beside them for a couple hours a day for 6 months, and then they would go away, and then they would write a book all about you. That's what happened. That person wouldn't know you anymore. My former fiance, girlfriend, friend, and what have you, and she, of course, had a far better opportunity to get to know me. I would have to.
Did you read that book right here?
No, I didn't.
Wondered if you were comfortable with your insights at all?
I didn't read it, and I just don't, because you see, even though, bless her heart, she had an opportunity to know me, we knew each other for several years, and if anybody knew me during that period, okay, it was a lovely person that she is and was. We were only just, real remote friends. We never lived together. We only saw each other a few times over many years. Saw me day in and day out and lived with me day in and day out for years.
Just for your information, usually it's referred to quite frequently in the writings of your life as a person whom you cared about. Things just didn't work out for one reason or the other. True, I don't know if this,
That's-
in the absence of you having an opportunity to read them, that's
Yeah.
why I wondered.
I've read parts of them. I'm not going to, I don't want to mislead you. I've read parts of them, and I'm aware that they've made that characterization, and that they've also, there are a lot of psychological theories about Ted Bundy, which are just a bunch of bullshit, it doesn't bother me, but people who read them and believe them are going to be misled if they think, for example, that I somehow broke up and this was such a traumatic episode in my life that I just went off the deep end. Well, that's simply not true. That's simply completely not true. And I don't care whether anybody believes me or not. I know in my heart, and I can tell you that, not that it's important necessarily in retrospect, but knew me. Now, whether or not when she sat down to write her memoirs, she put in there the way it really was. Because, you see, by the time she wrote the book, the Ted Bundy she was confronted with, at least in the public consciousness, was something different. So I think a lot of people, former friends and even relatives, are a little bit leery. Did I really know him? And maybe their perceptions of me will change. You've seen this. Well, yeah, I saw that in him. I could tell when he was 5 years old, because people don't want to feel like they've been fooled, or people don't want to feel like they've known someone and yet they didn't know him. And so they'll figure out all sorts of things to say, well, I could tell that he was capable of that, because he didn't open the door for me one time.
You didn't kick the cat.
Yeah, kick the cat. There's this one, I think somebody put it in their book, I heard this, I used to jump out from behind bushes.
Who did?
and scare I also used to walk on railroad tracks and see how long I could walk on the rails without falling off. Come on, give me a break. Jumping out from behind bushes was never my thing. When it came to, it was just a playful, childish thing that I did. Like when I was in the shower, I'd sometimes throw a cup of cold water. They get her out of the shower. So there's a lot of myth and about misunderstanding about, I guess, everything.
But it sells.
It sells, and unfortunately, though, I think it creates a problem. Misconceptions, I think, go deeper, and maybe I think that I'm sure that there are people in law enforcement or psychologists who are trying to become more knowledgeable about I think really the only approach
That's
to be
what-
taken
that's what we're
is
hearing.
your approach, in a systemized way. Gather the evidence without any preconceptions and without all the theories that are proposed in the media or in books.
Of course, you haven't read our book yet.
Well, it's got to, it can't be too much different.
You're familiar with all the pictures of the alleged victims, hair parts and everything.
I've been, yeah, I've
Who do you
seen.
propose that they are saying that represents? I mean, I'm sure, others have, did that person exist in Ted Bundy's life? I mean, we've, perceived that quite frequently, if someone is out targeting victims, or maybe representative, and there's truth to that because we've seen it. A number of people apparently in a situation in which, you've been suspected, think that trend is there. Does that person actually exist? Does that make sense to you at all? I mean, was there a dominant person in your life that they are basically prescribing as having represented these alleged victims?
Well, let me approach that question.
I'm not trying to ask you.
No, I hear you. No, let me approach this question this way. To begin with.
I mean, I've never seen Liz or Diane, so I don't know if they're saying that it's one of them or
Mhm.
somebody, whomever. Don't
So,
know.
again, that's pop psychology, I think.
Yeah,
They're
sure.
people are fishing around, they want a hook, they want a smoking gun, they want cause and effect, and it's not going to be there. It's not going to be there. I think all you have to do is go back to the late 60s, early 70s, and if you could recreate somehow the styles of the times, I wouldn't be surprised if you found out that young women between the ages of 16 and 26, 99 out of 100 had long hair with a part of the hair part.
Some of the 12-year-olds did, certainly did.
Yeah. That was the prevalent style of the time. So I don't think that is indicative of anything in particular. And talking about photographs, another one of the myths that I'm just appalled by in a way. It doesn't bother me. I'm appalled.
Is there a difference between appalled and not bothered?
I mean, appalled that people are so, I guess maybe so desperate to find something that makes sense to them. But they always have, many of the articles in the books include a series of photographs of me. A half a dozen photographs. Many faces of Ted Bundy, the great disguise artist. And they have all these photographs, and they all look different. They do, really. They all look different, I agree. But they were taken over a 10-year span of time. They have my graduation photograph in 65. They have my arrest photograph in 75. They're all taken at different. Even, look at you, either one of you, if you were to grow a beard, innocently grow a beard, and over the course of just a couple months, photographs when you are in different dress and different moods, different times of day, different expressions, you're going to look very, very different. And you're not trying to look different. But this is the myth they created, that I was a master of disguise. In fact, this is one of, sometimes we kid around the back, and one of the guys got to call me the master of disguise. That was my nickname.
The title for a book, I guess, right? But nobody's picked up on that one yet.
Yeah. But I think that because people believe that when if somebody sneaks around or goes around doing these things, they just assume that they disguise themselves. In really, in some way. What they don't understand is that you don't have to, and no one has to disguise themselves, really. Because people's minds, eyewitness, you know anything about eyewitness identification?
Oh, absolutely.
It is the worst form of evidence in court. It is also the worst form of information that, in my opinion, that a police officer can get, because it can be so misleading. And I've seen it happen over the years. But I know that I could walk up to somebody under ordinary circumstances, and they won't remember me a day or 5 days or a month later. I mean, under ordinary circumstances. I also know that when I escaped in Aspen, I was seen, and I never left that area.
Exactly.
I mean, I was escaped in Aspen if I went up in the mountains, and I wasn't equipped mentally or physically to handle, being up at 10,000 feet, even in the summertime, not knowing how to live off the land. It kind of wore me down. Nevertheless, I was just outside of Aspen in the mountains, and I was being seen at truck stops in Wyoming, in Seattle, in San Francisco, in Australia. Okay, and if I'd been in Australia, they would swear that that eyewitness who saw him was right. And I've seen this happen over and over again. So I'm saying, I know that I've seen people, who just never remembered seeing me, and I didn't have to hide, and I didn't have to disguise myself. I just had to be unobtrusive.
And yet, when you were arrested, you weren't recognized by police officers.
Even talking about here in Florida?
Yes.
Oh, sure. Yeah. No, I wasn't. I had to tell them I was in their custody for 2 or 3 days, and I was
saying
and I was on the 10 most wanted list at the time, and I had to tell them. They didn't believe who I was. I mean, when I told them.
When you were a fugitive and you became aware that you were on the 10 most wanted list, did that have any bearing on the way you acted or behaved, or no big deal one way or the other? Matter of survival and freedom at that point, continuous survival.
My opinion is, I'll be quite frank with you, that I'm not trying to be negative, or what would be the word, or insult your intelligence or anything, but I don't think y'all catch anybody, really. I think, and there are exceptions, okay, sure, but I think generally guys learn to catch themselves.
Do you think sometimes they want to be caught?
But
don't want to give up? Is that the difference?
I never wanted to get caught, I can tell you that, with no doubt in my mind. I mean, that's a pop theory. No one was pop psychological theories, but I never wanted to get caught. I was never worried about FBI posters, because my knowledge of how the human mind works told me that, unless I just stood there in the post office next to it, grinning stupidly, I never feared being identified based upon a photograph, because I know that photographs versus reality distort. And if you just act normal, people are not going to say. If you act weird, then they're going to say, I wonder what's wrong with you, and you're going to stand out. But being on the run, I wasn't worried about.
That's Ted Bundy,
being
there aren't a whole lot of Ted Bundys out there that aren't wanted posters. In other words, other individuals that do see them will act differently. They will,
Well, you have to take, I would certainly, as someone on a fugitive, such as I was, I was aware of, believe me, I wasn't oblivious to my status and the fact that I had to be concerned. But
if you were guilty as charged, we would consider you an organized person. Same as if I were doing those things based upon my abilities and intelligence and knowledge and whatnot, I would be doing things in an organized way. I wouldn't be real concerned about the posters either, because I feel the same way about people as you do. However, Joe Blow, this organized guy, he's going to panic. He's the guy that's going to start wearing a bandage on his eye, the guy that's going to grow a beard and dye his hair, things like that. So, statistically, I'm not trying to justify the way we do things, but obviously I think you can see statistically that it does help in many situations.
Well, it's something you can't avoid.
Your particular situation.
You can't avoid doing it. You can't ignore doing it, because, you would seem to be negligent in your duties if you didn't put these posters out, because that's what's expected of people who are looking for fugitives. But realistically, there are people who are going to see, who think that everybody goes around looking for people on FBI posters, whereas it's, that's just simply absurd. That just doesn't happen.
Well, to me, it's a stressor. The more stress you put on the guy,
Yeah.
the more chances the guy's going to make a mistake or do something stupid. And it's a stressor to a lot of people to see the wrong picture. Nobody else in that room would recognize him. He knows that's him, and therefore he assumes they see him the same way.
You're right. That's exactly what happens. And if you fall into that trap, you create your own stress, and the more paranoid you become, the more likely it is you get caught, because you start acting differently. But if you realize that person on that picture is not me, okay, you distance yourself. That's not me. That guy. My name's this, and I'm acting okay. And people are only going to think that I'm the person on that poster if I start acting in ways that make them think that I should be on that poster, you know?
Well, sure, they need you, so prime minister.
Whatever your preference is, if you want to kind of.
It's our general opinion that you will be back in, well, our opinion you'll be back in the general population before too much longer. We would like maybe to pursue this further with you sometime when this extra stress gets out of your life and all these problems are diminished. So, is that a fair statement?
The personal property found beside the road, I said, well, did you make a habit of, when you found a victim, going up and down the roadways on various access roads and highways to and from where the victim was found? And their answer to me was they didn't. They just happened to find this inadvertently. Now, I don't know if they're being straight with me or not, but my response was, well, what would you do if you just dumped the body of a person somewhere and you had a car full of stuff? Well, you start throwing it out the windows. Okay, I mean, think about it. Right? And maybe the reason that you found it there is because he was just driving down the highway. And if you went, and I said in the future, when the next time you find a body, for several miles on either, then take all the major routes out of there and just scour the roadsides. Now, I don't know if it's a standard procedure, but that was my suggestion. And because my feeling was that in all likelihood he just threw it out the window, and that would give him an idea where he was going. You know, a general idea of the route he chose.
You think when this guy is with the victims, how does he regard them? I mean, does he think of them as an identity? Does he depersonalizing them? Do you think he's picking hookers because he knows they're usually fairly verbal type of folks, and he wants to hear something come out of their mouths, whether it be a scream or a threat or a cry or whatever? Do you think that has any bearing in the selection, or do you just think it's because they're easy and they're there? Or do you think, as most people do in this investigation, that somewhere prostitution played a dark shadow in his life, whether it be with a relative or a bad experience he's had? You know, at the beginning there was the consideration that there was a biblical connotation here, you know, ridding the world of prostitutes, and maybe the first one's going into the river for baptismal purpose or cleansing them of their crime, you know.
Yeah, I hear you.
I have some problems with that, but I can understand it. Okay.
Okay. Again, I don't know, and I don't mean, I say this, I don't know what's going through the guy's mind exactly. And the only way anybody's going to know is to ask him, and I'm not trying to frustrate you on this. These are very good questions, and these are the kinds of things that have to go through anyone's mind who's looking at the case and trying to solve it. But the question as to what he does with a victim, I mean, I haven't seen, and don't need to see for that matter, the autopsy reports or, you know, the thing about the crime scenes. I mean, what the crime scenes look like or the status of any evidence they found. So I don't know how long, it would be important to me to know how long they were alive, if they can tell. And all they have is skeletal remains, so you really don't know. But it would be critical. I think there are a couple of the early victims, they might be able to do something. One of the, contrary to the information in the public domain, one of the victims was not in the water, as you know, one of the four, and that's significant. I think that's terribly significant.
How do you perceive that significance? I mean, just your gut feeling? My
gut feeling was that at the same time he was pulling her down the hillside toward the river, the cops were scouring an area just a short distance away where they just found the body that same day. And I think all of a sudden he snapped to what was happening, or somebody surprised him, and he took off like hell because he just left her there. And
that close.
He came that close. Yeah. That was, and I'll bet you, I'd have to get out I have one of these things, these police lists that show when people disappear, but I'll bet you he went home and he said, Jesus Christ, I was that close. And his heart was probably going 1,000 beats a minute, and he may have taken stock in himself, and you noticed at that point he went from the river somewhere else. I think if it was any chance, I mean, too many years have passed, but it could have been a car just driving along the road, or it could have been the flashlights of investigators going on the crime scene. It could have been any number of things, but it looks to me like panic and surprise.
Yeah, yeah. And he learned.
And you learn. This guy's a learner. Some guys aren't learners. Some guys are just so disorganized they're not learners. They're just going to bumble along until they get caught. Okay, this guy's a learner, or was a learner.
Do you perceive him as totally organized?
No, no way. It's totally organized.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a useful model that you have there, but it's, you know, subject to, you know, some modifications. Or, in my opinion, that you can have a hybrid. I mean, that you don't have a totally disorganized or a totally organized. You have guys who are more or less organized and more or less disorganized, who might progress from an organized mode to a disorganized mode, or vice versa.
Rarely.
Or,
The other one.
okay,
Right.
I hear you.
Yeah. Although he may have to an extent, although we would expect him to be more organized than disorganized.
Exactly.
Simply because it wasn't an attack. I mean, basically, he's confronting these people and engaging in conversation, basically winning them into his confidence, which says something about his social skills, apparently. Okay, even though they're not that, a prostitute's not that difficult a person to get into your car, nonetheless, he obviously has enough confidence in himself to speak to these young ladies and to spend a little time with them while they're still alive. He's got a vehicle, and he's leaving the premises, but he's adjusting, and that's the important thing, which means he's intellectualizing. He's not basically acting totally out of instinct. He's thinking, and he's probably following the media, and he's done a lot of things we would expect him to do. So I would think that he tends to fall in the more organized.
Oh, certainly, no question.
Becoming more organized.
And becoming more organized.
And to me, the ultimate organization is to know when to quit.
And no one to quit, sure.
That's right. And we don't know how many of those people have ever reached that point. We just don't know.
Or know how to control
That's right.
that urge to the point where he could still be, this guy could still be just indulging his passions just a couple times a year, and you know, prostitutes are still very mobile. They still disappear. I imagine that most of the hookers on the streets in the Puget Sound area now weren't on the streets several years ago.
That's right.
So
It's a whole new
it's all
generation,
new.
so to speak.
Yeah. He could still be doing it, but you just don't know. You just don't know if he's still alive or where he is. So I think that, but just for sanity's sake, the investigators have to assume that they're going to solve the case, and he's out there somewhere, that he isn't buried 6 feet under somewhere.
Yeah.
In which case, everybody has got to throw up their hands and say, "Why me?"
I'm sure, I don't know, touched on this, if he would be as direct with you as I'm going to be. And, you know, when you come into these interviews like this, and someone is kind enough to give us your time like you are, and I realize you've got a lot of pressing matters, obviously. But there was obviously other homicides up there, similar, years prior, you know, which, you know, you've been close suspected of them. Do you perceive this guy as following the role of someone else, or do you think that this is just totally an adjustment because of this one coming up out of the water? You know what I'm getting at? Same part of the country, very similar type of homicides. And I know you've had to think about that because.
Do you think he was actually sitting down reading about other crime series and then trying to pattern himself or otherwise learn?
Well, I believe his needs or his drives are certainly from within. I mean, he doesn't have to get that from anybody.
Right.
But the technique, we use the word MO because I don't know that much about all the crime scenes to be that strong. But do you think that that had anything to do with it?
Well,
I mean,
I'm sure
we've got two major ones in the country in the last 10 years. They're both up there. Now, in truth, we had the one down in, one ongoing in Los Angeles right now, where 11 or 12 prostitutes have been killed, possibly by the same person. There's one in Oakland, California, where there are 8 or 9 who've been murdered. Some of them may have been, I feel strongly, by the same person. We had a situation, the media termed the Night Stalker investigation down in Los Angeles that I worked on for a couple of weeks out there. We've had other serial ones, but not with the dumping of the bodies per se, not the approach of the victims. You know, the Night Stalker would go into houses at night, and people were asleep. These other ones I mentioned to you in Oakland and Los Angeles are basically block hookers who are being propositioned and never seen again. Whereas up in the Northwest, now you've got two up there now, two series, that's what we would call them. Very similar. I mean, in the earlier case, we have no reason to believe that the women at all had anything to do with prostitution. You know, the obvious physical resemblances that media played up, physical attractiveness, but nonetheless, still, that part of the country, that type of apparently very organized individual. I'm just wondering if, I'm sure you get a lot of thought because you lived up that way, plus you've certainly had contact with investigators about this.
There's one more that you didn't mention, the budding series that I see in evidence down in the Tampa area. I don't know if you've been alerted to that.
Are these the ones with the girls who are being dumped in cemeteries?
Cemeteries, they have half a dozen of them now.
We've had some general inquiries, but I don't know that we're actually working on it yet unless it's happened this last week.
I don't know what's going on. But you know, getting back to your idea there, I think that there are, it's certainly got to plague the law enforcement people up there wondering if there's something about the Pacific Northwest that encourages that kind of crime. But it's not just two. There are, if you've looked at the list of unsolved homicides that could be of a serial type, there are dozens of unsolved homicides in the Pacific Northwest over the past 10 years. Mm-hmm. Unsolved, not even linked to a particular series.
Right.
And it's clear somebody's doing it. Okay, somebody's doing it. Okay, and I said, you don't just have the Green River Killer up there. You've probably got 5 to 10 other guys doing their thing up there, in one way or another. This is the scary thing. There could be a couple Lake and Ings up in the foothills, and nobody in Northern California. There was no big stink about a serial murder pattern down in Northern California. Nobody was aware of any group of disappearances that were suspiciously related, and yet you had this ongoing thing. But it was like, if a tree falls down in the woods, does it make sound, kind of thing. Well, if a person disappears and there's no body, is there a murder? Okay, that's the same kind of thing going on. And so, sure, you've got these two, but the Pacific Northwest has a lot more too. And I do think there's something. I don't know. I mean, unlike you, I don't have access to all the data to know, you know, where the various serial murders that have serial murder patterns that have been identified have occurred. But I do think the Pacific Northwest has more than its share. Okay.
Certainly does.
For what? I mean, look at not just Seattle, Portland, but look north of the border. Look at Vancouver. They've had a couple up there over the years.
We've had several of them to look at, and you're right, they have considered the links there. They really have.
The date is February 13th, 1986. This is Bill Hagmeyer along with Special Agent of the Jacksonville Division. The interview is being held at the Florida State Prison in Rayford, Florida, and the interviewee is Theodore H. Bundy.
And I don't blame them, but that's the way it is. They were nervous as hell. I was talking to the New York Times person yesterday. You know, what can I say to him? You know.
As an attorney, you know, I don't always agree with what attorneys do or don't do, but as an attorney, you can appreciate their interest anyway. I mean, that's what they're there for.
It's never bothered me. And I'll say what I want to say. And I know what I should and shouldn't say.
No, I was going to get back to Green River, but I don't want to interrupt you again.
Oh, the Green River is I don't know if you've read some of the letters that I've written.
I haven't seen any of them.
I've probably written them over 200 pages worth of
You had
stuff.
mentioned in the letter that you written to me that you had written to him and you hadn't heard a whole lot recently.
He stopped writing to me in September. I don't know why. I wrote him a 20-page letter and posed a number of ideas and looking for some feedback or something, and he never wrote back. And well, you know, he's got more to do than write to me. That's all. And I don't take offense.
Yeah, but basically you feel that you got an investment of your time and sharing whatever you'd like to see, what the results may or may not be.
You know, I thought that I might have something to add because, like, I feel let's talk about a computer program. They've developed this massive. Here they developed a some kind of computer program or programs, and told me something about what they were thinking of doing, and I don't know what else they've done. But I mean, there are a lot of programs that I can run, okay, and I don't need to spend $2 million to do it. If I had the data, now I can realize, I understand why they can't show me stuff or tell me stuff, and I don't want to know. But just seeing those crime scene photos was something of a revelation, you know, because I could see some of the changes the guy was going through, at least on a superficial level. To me, a superficial level, because the person that they're looking for, assuming it's one person, may still be and was then a real living, viable, breathing human being that just went about his life in a way that made sense to him. Okay. He wasn't a monster and isn't a monster. Because again, when you start using those pejorative terms and those passionate terms, he's a sick, demented person. Okay, sure. Now but remember, there's a lot in him that's in you.
Of course there is.
And there's nothing in this guy. There's nothing this guy has thought that you haven't thought in one way or another at one time. Okay. And he
just, right, for whatever reason, carried the thoughts a step further.
Sure.
Is your gut feeling that you brought up an interesting point? Do you think there could be more than one person responsible for this?
Well, I just don't have enough information, and what I've seen.
I haven't even seen all the crime scene photos, so I mean,
my gut.
give him credit for about, what, 36 now or something like that?
Yeah.
Good round number.
Yeah. At least, you know, they have 10 or 15 more missing.
Something like that, yes. Lovely.
You know, that's really a bottom line. I mean, we're talking about a lot more. The guy didn't get killed in an automobile accident somewhere. No, it looks. I mean, it looks like one person. Sure.
Okay, you're mentioning, and I certainly agree with you, that the rest of us have the same kind of thoughts and perhaps feelings that individual would have. With that in mind, do you think he could have just stopped? I mean, it's been quite some time. Can a person be believed to stop and his feelings are then satisfied, their needs are suppressed or whatever? Or do you think that he's been taken out of the population and basically that's why, to our knowledge, no more of them have occurred?
Very good question. My response to that, a year and a half ago when I talked to him.
Was it that long ago?
Well, it was October of '84. October, November of '84. I spoke to them here in this room. A couple days we talked. And then I was exercising more of a conventional wisdom about, well, saying more or less based upon what I know and what I've read, no, this guy is, you know, going to go till he burns himself out because, listen, in the year and a half he was active, at least the year and a half with the data, the evidence shows he was active from July of 82 to December of 83. He is accredited with at least 45 people just in King County. Now that is super intense. I don't think anybody can appreciate the level of intensity that exhibits, because I don't think that's way above the mean average of frequency for a serial killer. That'd be my guess. And still he avoided detection. That's an extraordinary achievement, even though he was dealing with a very vulnerable victim class, which, you know, it's very hard to investigate cases involving the murders of prostitution to begin with.
It's not a real high-risk crime for the offender.
Right, it's very low risk, and even though he was just so bold as hell, I can't believe his brashness.
He's been lucky.
And lucky, and going back to the same area with all hell breaking loose, and all the prostitutes on the streets fully aware of what was going on, and continue to get victims. But could he stop, though? That I have thought about that. We know so little, and I wondered, is it possible? Would it be possible under those circumstances, as intense and as into it as he obviously was? Could he stop? And we know so little about the behavior patterns of persons who commit serial murder. I mean, on a grand scale. I mean, you don't. It's not like you can go to you're a behavioral scientist and you just invite a whole bunch of people into a room and have them fill out questionnaires. I mean, there's just so much that's unknown. But I think I don't think it's inconceivable that that could happen. I don't think it's inconceivable. Just as people change behavior drastically and are transformed for whatever reason, whether they live lives where they're alcoholics or whatever their personal problem might be. I think there are instances in life that we all have seen where people had serious problems and just came to grips with them and dealt with them and stopped. Now, most people aren't able to do that, but I agree. I mean, most people just go on until, they're arrested, or, they're alcoholics, or, they lose their job, or they get a divorce, or some crisis happens in their lives. But there are people, I think, who are capable, for whatever reason, of facing up to, the difficulties they're having and the distortions of their minds and reforming themselves. Now, I think this is highly unlikely, but I don't think it's inconceivable. But again, you're dealing. You just don't know. It would be extraordinary if someday you found out this guy just stopped. But
speak in terms of equating it like with alcoholism, which may not be like an escape or whatever for people, and it's difficult for them to overcome it, but occasionally it can. And like a serial murder, at least from my own personal perception of the Green River case and some others like it, appears to be a crime, behavior, activity, whatever, of almost a power. And I would use the word possession, total possession. That's the way I perceive people who are serial murderers, whom we would term organized, so to speak, and you're certainly familiar with how we categorize people. I can't envision what goes on in their mind when they're actually controlling and killing, okay, and whatever else may or may not be involved, whether it be playing out a sexual fantasy or exploration or whatever, but the actual being there at the moment that life is gone. To me, it's almost like a total possession. That person would be mine. No one else in the world can control that person. There's nothing that person can do anymore for themselves. Totally in my hands. Okay. They left this earth in my hands. They had no choice. No one could stop me at that particular time. I can only imagine that it's almost, in a sinister way, society would look at it, but almost a euphoric feeling. And a person that's so active as this guy has been, if he is due the credit that has been given to him, I can't think of anyone else in our society who has been basically given credit for that many in that short a period of time. It must be just a tremendous drive, almost a need for this feeling of possession. I don't think it's so much to just eliminate a life. I mean, there were easier victims for him to find. Prostitutes are certainly high and highly visible. But he could have taken children, could have taken elderly people or something like that in another way. But the ones he was choosing, basically, are very spirited type of folks. They're outgoing. They're out on the streets constantly dealing with other people. And it's a challenge for him. They're going to fight back a little bit, but he just totally controlled them. And I just wonder, to me, I just can't equate it so much with like alcoholism or a habit or something. Can you actually get that out of your system? I mean, is that possible to stop? I mean, that's been one of the real big burning questions for us. We look at ages, of course, and activity. Does a person like this start to burn out at some point? Or what? I don't know what you're...
I think you're right on in your questions. I can understand.
I'm asking an awful lot of questions.
Oh, sure. I can see where your mind's going, and I see that you're probing and you're trying to understand, and you're dealing, with some very important kinds of issues and concepts. But don't sell yourself short. You can understand. Okay, you can understand because in your own way, there are things in your own life you've experienced that kind of intensity and that kind of a power. Maybe you have problems, or anybody has problems they can't control. And I don't mean to demean or diminish the seriousness of what happened, say, in the Green River case. It was obviously a very serious, tragic situation. But to that person who's doing it, it makes sense at the time. And who knows what all the emotions and the passions and the mental images that are rushing through his mind before, during, and after. This is, of course, extremely important from both a behavioral scientist's point of view and a law enforcement's point of view. But you can begin to get inside this man's head if you try to use personal experiences as a guide to a certain extent. And I guess there's no way to know precisely what he thought or what he did until he tells you. And I think sometimes I could see myself trying to figure out what's going through the Green River killer's head to the point where I was just driving myself nuts. Why? Why this and not that? Why prostitutes and not children or old people? Why the river? Why the mountains?
Now you know what a profiler goes
Sure.
through.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And you just don't have the data to make those kinds of decisions. For instance, let me give you an idea. When I was talking to Bob Keppel, they said, do you think this guy would keep the stuff he's taking from the victims? The personal possessions that apparently we weren't finding any. I said, well, yeah, maybe not. But you don't know. You don't have any information really to say for sure one way or the other. And if you have a hot suspect and he doesn't have anything, that doesn't mean he's not the person. On the other hand, if you have a hot suspect and you search his apartment, you find lockers full of stuff, well, you've got him, right? So it doesn't really, it's an important thing to keep in mind, but don't torture yourselves over it because there's no way to know. You have no information. One interesting thing they did find that they said, we found a couple miles away from the site where this victim was found, they found her driver's license. What do you think was happening there? Were they fighting? This is what they told me. I don't know if they're being straight with me. This was one of the victims named Kimmy Pitts or something was found in the Kent Valley. We found her driver's license over here, on the side of freeway. What was going on? I said, well, I don't know, but I seriously doubt they were fighting. I don't think very many of these victims had a chance to fight with the guy. He was very, very efficient at whatever he was doing. I mean, this is really the extraordinary accomplishment, if you want to look at it, of this particular individual that nobody that anybody knows of that I am aware of got away from him. And considering the streetwise nature of the people he's up against, it's quite it's, I say, an accomplishment in quotes.
What is?
Yeah,
That's a good word to use. It is an accomplishment.
Certainly not, not a positive one, but an accomplishment nonetheless.
But you've got a definite public and media sensitivity in that part of the country right now, and has been for several years, so that you've got basically the media linking them sometimes prior to the investigators linking them. Justified or not, but it's borne out in the end sometimes that they are linked. We've had many inquiries from different parts of the country where the media is putting homicides together and unjustifiably so. They just didn't know what the hell they were talking about. And other times they've come in and I've talked to the investigators and they said, oh, there's no way they're related. 3 months later, there's no doubt they were related.
Sure.
So, just awareness up there, I'm sure.
I wouldn't be surprised if, no thank you, if publicity about these kinds of crimes has a contagious effect. I'm not saying that if someone were to read accounts of these kinds of murders, that they're going to go out and try to emulate them necessarily. But I think it's part of the entire constellation of influences, pressures, and stresses, what have you, on a given individual that just come into play that are going to ultimately result in him acting out fantasies that result in him committing serial murders. And it intends to live in an area where there are these kinds of activities going on in combination with, let's say, other influences, whether it be, you know, personal problems or abuse or low self-image, or, you know, God knows what goes into the final formula on any given individual. It's very complex and perhaps incomprehensibly complex interaction of forces, but maybe it's exposure, violence in the media, or maybe it's pornography, or maybe it's just all kinds of things acting together with being able to read about something that's really happening and saying, hey, and sort of coming to accept it as a norm. And there's also something in, I think this kind of stuff can also attract people to an area. They say, well, it happens here and people don't get caught. Maybe I should go up there and see what's going on. But I think more, well, years ago, I mean, if you were to, let's say you're a guy who's just got these fantasies about, you know, going out and abducting women. You really haven't ever acted them out. You're not sure what's what. So you go down to the local magazine shop and you know, what are you going to indulge your fantasies in? What, I mean, if you're, I said this to you, I said this, you may have read it in the transcripts. If you're a fisherman, you go down to the magazine store and you pick up a fishing magazine. Or a skier, you're going to read about skiing and look at it on the tube. Well, if your thing, at least on a fantasy level, or even in reality, is going out and killing, abducting people, well, perhaps you're going to indulge that fantasy vicariously by reading about it or seeing film, movies about it, or whatever, indulges it vicariously. So he goes down, he reads, say, the detective magazine, and he sees, well, there's a whole series of these kinds of crimes going on down in California, hitchhikers in California, or whatever. And the light might go on. Oh, gee, I hadn't thought of that before. And that'll become a part of the fantasy process. It may or may not. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's just one scenario.
You think there's a particular point in that person's development, whether it be age-wise or life experience-wise or whatever, where all that starts clicking together and he sees that this is my life's work, or this is what I need to do, or do you perceive that it comes on all at once in this kind of person, or you know, he just gradually escalates to it?
Again, I wouldn't, I'd be reluctant to speculate. However, my sense is, and it's not based on a lot of information, right? My sense is it's gradual. You know, I mean, isn't something that happens overnight. Okay. What brings a person to the point where he acts out of fantasy is, you know, he's probably, if you could figure out that puzzle, you know, where he goes from thinking about it to doing it. Why and how that occurs is a puzzle that if you could find a solution to, that might be all you need to unravel the whole ball of wax. What brings a person to that point is a mystery. What brings a person to the point where they say they transform their whole lives and they feel like they're born again, right? What brings a person to the point when they feel like they're seeing life for the first time and they're ready to start turning themselves around? I mean, it has something to do with the human character, where I think we just, whether for good or evil, we become ready. We become ready, you know. I'm ready to start doing things right. I'm ready to stop drinking and stop fooling around and straighten my life up. Or I'm ready to go out and I'm just ready. I don't know why. I'm just ready to go out and kill somebody tonight. Or try anyway. May not do it. May screw up because I have never done it before. It's like anything else. You've got to start somewhere. And so if you start somewhere, it's like if you're a skier, you may have been dreaming about skiing all your life, reading the magazines, thinking about it, watching Warren Miller films and everything. And the day comes and you say, well, I'm going to try it. Well, you're going to go to the Bundy Hill and you're going to fall down. You're going to fall down unless you're very, very good. And there are some people who get up skis and go right down the hill, and there are some who struggle.
Some of them will pick a very high hill the first time, and others will start on a small slope.
Yeah. And some will take lessons.
Some will take lessons, excellent. Okay. On a person like a serial killer, okay, that's fantasized, maybe read, maybe seen movies, dreamt, whatever, that kind of person likely to start on the slope. In other words, pick a more defenseless victim, start with a representative victim, whether it be just toying around with a doll or something like that, or will they go right to the highest mountain and actually attempt, and if this is a crime of possession, that's what I'm calling it. I don't know if you agree with me or not. That's the way I see some of these serial murders. Are they going to go right to the type of individual that they've been fantasizing about weeks, months, years, or whatever?
Yeah, I hear you. Let me say, I think it's useful to explore these kinds of ideas and concepts, but I always have to remind myself that I don't fall into the trap of getting into stereotypes, because each individual is different. I know that sounds like a cliche, but it isn't. And if I start getting an idea that every person goes about it the same way, then I fall into that trap of thinking, well, that I know how that person is thinking. I really don't. I know how I think and how I can put myself into that person's mind if I know enough, if I have enough facts. Something to go on. I have something to go on. So, with that in mind, then I can try to work it out a theory like you just posed as to whether, is he going to start with an easy victim and go to something he's looking for? I don't, excuse me, I don't, we can talk about all these, and I think it's useful to develop the mental equipment to be able to, and maybe sharpen your perceptions. And so when you go out in the field and you're confronted with a real life situation, with all the stuff that an investigator comes up against, that comes into play, and you can see things that maybe other people won't see, or you won't fall prey to the temptation of trying too hard to overlay some preconceptions over it. Well, this is what he's like or isn't like, and narrow your view in such a way that you might overlook, or you might not see who you're looking for. You're making him fit your mold, and with all due respect, I think that's one of the great dangers of profiling. What if you're off just a little bit?
Sure.
Okay.
That's why we try to profile cases. We try to never do them just by ourselves. We usually try to have at least 2 or 3 other people around. One of them will play the devil's advocate and say, I think you all are off for this reason. And when we do finish up, and we certainly could be wrong, we're just on the threshold, hopefully, of getting these insights that we want. It's a group decision. In other words, we've got 3 or 4 people saying, well, we consider this and that, but based upon probabilities, based upon what experience we've had, based upon what exposure we've had, speaking to folks with common experiences and investigators and in research projects, this is what the state of the art is right now, and this is what we perceive it to be. But it's an interesting insight. When I sit down and try to do one myself, I'm going to be very careful that I don't fall. I try to put myself into the mind, the soul of the perpetrator.
I hear you.
But, I try to look at things as he did, I don't necessarily try to understand him at that particular point. I only want to try to meet him for a while, write down what I do next, and then try to step back and think, oh, you know, if that's true, then why did that happen? And that's the second part of it. So you're right. You've got to be very careful.
Plus, that is not set in concrete. That, you know, that changes.
Absolutely right.
And of course, the ideas of art and the science. I mean, ideally, I guess when you're confronted with this kind of a problem, you would go out there and the people who would be most effective would almost go work on a gut level, on an intuitive level, where they weren't just going through the motions of following what they learned in police school. That they really have a sixth sense about what's happening, what they're looking for. They're able to see beyond the obvious.
We really haven't gotten into some of the questions that we would ask on our research project. I don't know how much time you'll have to spend with us. Kind of quite a thorough thing here, an instrument which you know, is kind of a guarded thing at this particular point, but I'm more than willing to let you take a look at it just to get your own gut feeling, so you feel comfortable not going over some of the materials. But if we do get into this today, or depending upon what your schedule is and your priorities are, we do have a form, and this is not an advice of rights waiver in any shape or form, that we ask people to look at and see if they're comfortable with it. Maybe you want to peruse that for a few minutes if you can.
And they told them that you were here and scheduled to be with me all day, and that really ticked them off. No, we can't spend all day.
No, what we're just saying is that they've given us the opportunity to use this office all day if we want to. So, we'll stop whenever you want to stop. But, there will people walking back and forth out there, but basically the colonel has said if he's got time and he'd like to stay all day, you can stay all day, so we're on your schedule.
Yeah, it's the timing for us getting together is kind of bad, because I've got a lot of things we're involved in, and my attorney's going to be here today, and I'll be busy all day tomorrow with visits and interviews and what have you. And it's not an atmosphere that's conducive to gearing my mind to thinking about the things we're talking about here, and really getting into kind of discussion that will produce the kind of information that you're looking for. I mean, I think that we've talked about a number of things this morning that are very interesting. You're obviously, you're really into it, and I'm impressed with your desire to figure stuff out. Having an open mind is the most important thing. Keeping an open mind is the most important thing. You start to close off your mind and just see it one way, that's when you miss something. And I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen too many times where investigators close their mind off and they miss stuff. Serious stuff for whatever reason. And they're it's just because they're human, and it's not to be derogatory about them, but they're good investigators and bad investigators, and some of them are just there pulling in the paycheck, and they're not artists or scientists.
And it depends on some of them. They don't come upon these cases very often.
This is true.
They're in over their head.
Oh yeah.
You're limited by your own experience.
Exactly.
You've never had one like this.
That's why a lot of them will use us as a central resource, because we have an opportunity to see cases around the world, basically. We're getting 400 or 500 cases a year referred to us now, which is a hell of a lot of cases. We're not necessarily right on the crime scenes, picking up bodies and whatnot, but there are very few people in the world that get an opportunity to observe in detail investigations and follow them through that many times. So it's a learning process, but it helps, and we become a repository, and then what we take in we then put back out. But we want to improve that product, and that's kind of why we're here.
Yeah,
One of the reasons.
sure. And there's no one else doing the kind of thorough work that you are. I've looked around, and I've seen a lot of flaky stuff being done in the area of serial murder. So-called experts running around the country having seminars, and it's really pathetic. It's really pathetic. And they come to me all the time, do this, do that, give me an interview. And I see the kind of work they're doing, and they're just...
Do you think they're looking for